The books are open!
Okay. God is good all the time. I want to thank us for once again joining in together. And to thank us for joining in together. And I also thank our first speaker, Elder Abila, for the wonderful exposition he's done on the architecture of divine justice, where he's looked into the biblical parallels for the investigative judgment across both testaments, and also an analysis as to that. Before I proceed, there are these materials we printed out, and I want to believe all of us has a copy of the materials. Just a quick guide, you will have a handout that basically has a full page of the whole program of the day and what we'll be discussing. So please have this. Just behind the page is a pictorial description of Revelation entitled Revelation 4 and 5. I will have this to handle, though we had handled it also in our previous symposium. It will be handled a bit because it's all about the divine courtroom and the sanctuary is involved. So it will be very, very critical and important. I'm pretty sure Elder Bila will tackle this in his last presentation. And as to Christ being the center, of all these prophetic timelines of everything we are talking about today. Secondly, you will see the 2300 days. You have quite a bunch of these copies of the 2300 days. There is this one that's from AFCO. It's the 2300 days. It's just a clear analysis of everything. Behind it, you have the 490 years. We'll tackle this in the next two presentations as to the 490 years, basically the biblical proof as to the year-day prophecy, giving it the biblical basis and what it deserves for us to understand why we as Adventists rely on the year-day prophecy. Quickly, we'll also have another leaflet that has Daniel chapter 8 verse 13 and verse 14, chapter 9 verse 22 and verse 27 that also tackles particulars on the 2300 days. I will tackle portions of these, then Elder Bildad will tackle another portion as to when they begin, the historical records and the evidences therein. Behind that we have another record on Daniel chapter 8 verse 9 through to verse 27. These will also be tackled today. Then Elder Bila has basically measured on the first part on portions of Daniel chapter 7, the kingdoms that came, in Daniel chapter 2. You'll have this within the leaflet on Daniel chapter 2 of world empires, and Daniel chapter 7, struggle for world dominion. So I believe and hope we'll all be guided, and with the materials you've shared with us, hatutapotea sana. You'll take them and study them as you go back home today and teach others, or rather be as the Bereans from Acts 17 verse 11 to study more as to what all these entail. Now, before we proceed, I'd like us to pray, so we can pray. Father Lord, we invoke your presence, the presence of your Spirit, Lord, to dwell with us as we break the bread and as we look into the scriptures, Lord, to understand your words. We are but men, but through your Spirit, your Holy Ghost, we ask that we may have and gain an understanding. This we pray in Jesus' name. So, I don't know how to proceed, but I hope this will work out well, because we are getting into... it won't be so deep, but it will be also simple for us to understand, because the two presentations we did a lot of studies and analysis of our scriptures, getting to the Hebrew canon, doing comparisons within the Greek lexicon, and just checking if everything works out. Now, within this second session, the most critical defensive session in this symposium, because it answers the question, if Antiochus the fourth, Epiphanes, who apparently was the Syrian Greek king that persecuted Jews between 167 BC to 164 BC, fits Daniel 8 so well. And why do we as Adventists reject this interpretation? Brothers and yes, brothers. Yes, sister. Yes, I was looking. My apologies. My apologies. Brothers and sister. Venye Neema ametoka, so I didn't notice her. But brothers and sisters, I need us to understand that we as Adventists have an understanding, or rather, Daniel chapter 8 verse 13 and verse 14. Maybe we can just read it because I need us to understand why this is a counterfeit, as to why we say we are unmasking the counterfeit in history. Somebody read us Daniel chapter 8 from verse 9 through to verse 14.
Daniel chapter 8 verse 9 says,
It says,
"And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceedingly great towards the south and towards the east and towards the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down." Chapter 12, verse 12. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it came down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. To verse
14.
Or 14, 13 says, "Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to the trodden underfoot?" 14, "And he said unto me, And unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed."
Thank you very much. Now, one most critical verse within our church as Adventists is the book of Daniel chapter 8 verse 13 and verse 14. And why do we say so? We say so because it's as a result of this very book that we have what we hold today as Adventists. Because think of this, in 1844, what happened is that these people had been making these calculations. Picture William Miller. And William Miller, while making these calculations, he realizes and gains an understanding of the prophecies of Daniel. And after keenly studying the prophecies of Daniel, he gets into the book of Daniel chapter 8 and is baffled with this prophecy of Daniel chapter 8 from verse 13 and verse 14, when an holy one is heard asking a certain holy one of how long all these abominations would take place. Then in response in verse 14, the holy one, there's a study we once had here, the Holy One from the Hebrew context, the Aramaic context, it's Palmoni. The Holy One here, it's a representation of Christ, or the Holy One is Christ. And when the response is given, he says it would take 2,300 days. Now, when these people studied these timelines and had an understanding of these timelines, they calculated that all these would begin from 457 BC all through to 1843. And after understanding that it would end in 1843, the understanding that they had was that Christ would come back. Interestingly, it was a fulfillment of prophecy, because the first angel's message says in Revelation chapter 14 verse 7, "Fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment is come." So William Miller was used as an herald for the proclamation of the first angel's message as he fulfilled Revelation 14 verse 7. He also fulfilled Revelation chapter 10, and at that very moment Miller was also bringing in for the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 8 verse 13 and verse 14. Well, personally I believe that Daniel chapter 8 verse 13 and verse 14 is the verse that has made us who we are as Adventists. Because these men, the Millerite movement, at first they were disappointed in 1843. That was it in March or April 21st? March 21st. Then because of the first disappointment in 1843, they realized they had the zero year era, and they pushed it forward to the following year in 1844, 21st March. Again, another disappointment came. So they were not very sure of how these prophecies would be fulfilled. Then around August, when now the fulfillment of the book of Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 2, verse 3 and verse 4, that is the tarrying time prophecy that also matches with that of Matthew 25, when the midnight cry was made. Someone by the name Samuel Snow, was it Samuel Snow? Samuel Snow, right? Okay, Samuel Snow looks into the Hebrew text and the Jewish text and understands that the timelines really meant, or rather led to a fulfillment of something very specific and particular. And he gave them a new timeline, and within this new timeline he understood that the calculations they had were not right but were wrong, but the new calculation would end the 2300 day prophecy on the 22nd of October 1844. Now as a result of all this comes the great disappointment. After the great disappointment, what we see next is an instance whereby all these men they left the faith, not left the faith per se, but let me just use the term, they were greatly disappointed, to the extent that unaishiwa cycle of what you believed in and all that. But then these two men, the two men on the 23rd of October, these were, what are their names? Crozier and they were in the farm of the other person, Hiram Edson. While they were at Edson's farm, there is this vision that in a way appeared to them, and then they got into studying, and while studying they realized that Christ wasn't to come back as they had interpreted before, but what was to happen was he had begun a new ministration in the sanctuary that was based in heaven. And this is what led to the doctrinal grounding and the belief system of the Adventist church to the point that we are in right now. But mark you, one thing you need to understand, that in everything that exists in this world, always there will be a counterfeit. And why do we say so? Because the central question we should be asking ourselves in this session is that there is another method that has been brought forth to help people understand the prophecy of Daniel chapter 8 different from that which we as Adventists have believed in or studied and led to our existence. And the central question here would be, if the enemy wanted to neutralize a prophecy that exposes him, what would be the most effective strategy? And the answer to this would be to redirect that prophecy. And this is what we see the enemy he has been doing. He would make people think it was fulfilled in the past, or a mirror or a minor historical figure, so they never look for its real fulfillment in the present. And because of this, we find that the identification of this one symbol determines whether Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 is closed ancient history or a present reality. Why do we say so? Today I want us to understand is that we are going to do something. I'm going to do something with us that's a bit uncomfortable, because we are going to stillman the best case against our interpretation. Okay, let me explain what I mean. What I mean by mentioning to stillman. Many a times when we want to refute an error, we do not teach the error. We only teach the points that would help us flee from the error. But today, I want to still man the interpretation and bring the understanding of this interpretation as it is taught outside, then compare its weaknesses based on the biblical evidences that we have today. Remember our theme for session 2. Our theme for session 2 is unmasking the counterfeit in history. Now, because the devil always wants to redirect this, we've studied this several times, he has always brought several schools of interpretation of Bible prophecy. And among these schools, we have the preterists method, and also we have the futurists method. But we as Adventists, we hold on to the historicist method of Bible prophecy interpretation. Last time we did quite a bunch of historicism and the other subsects on historicism. Now, based on what we are studying today, because it's a question in Daniel chapter 8, and Daniel chapter 8 basically has two beasts over there. We have the he-goat and then we have the ram. The ram comes first, then the he-goat comes and then destroys the ram. And the he-goat waxes great with a horn in the middle of its eyes. Then at the height of its power, this horn is broken, and then from it in verse 8 springs forth 4 horns. And verse 9 we are told that out of one of them came forth a little horn. Now we have this history of the little horn that causes menace and causes lots of terrible things among the hosts of heaven, or rather even to the very prince of hosts, casting him and treading him down. And among this little horn, there are several details that has been mentioned from the verse we've just read in Daniel chapter 8 verse 9 through to verse 14, and comparing the various schools of thought, that is preterists, when they speak of the little horn, they refer to the little horn to someone by the name Antiochus 4 Epiphanes. Antiochus 4 Epiphanes, that is the man you want to look into today. The futurists, on the other hand, push this prophecy on Daniel chapter 8 to the future and speak of a future Antichrist who would arise to fulfill the prophecy of Daniel chapter 8 verse 9 through to verse 14. When it comes to the 2300 days mentioned in Daniel chapter 8 verse 14, the preterists speak of it as literal days that happened. Others bring it as though it's literal days. Others bring the aspect of evenings and mornings to mention that the 2300 days were sort of evenings and mornings, so ni nusu nusu. So that there were 1150 mornings and 1150 evenings, totaling to 2300 days. These are the interpretations that they have to speak of it as literal days that happened in the past. And one thing we should also notice that just from the term preterists, I don't want to explain, but it's pre. You know, nikitu ilifanyika, it's pre. It's pre. Just get it that way. The futurists ni future. The historicist aligns all things that happened in history, then plays them out within the historical timelines of prophecy. Venye zilifanyika. Then when we get to the temple mentioned within the context of Daniel chapter 8, Daniel 8 from verse 9, specifically verse 11 and verse 12, they speak of the earthly Jerusalem that Antiochus, that is the preterist Antiochus, came to attack. And also on this other side, the futurists, this is also something that is really on the rise. They speak of an earthly rebuilding of the temple that will happen in Jerusalem, present day Jerusalem. While the cleansing part of the sanctuary, the preterists have it from a past defilement that Antiochus did, and the futurists have it as a future defilement that this future Antichrist will cause upon the earthly temple that will be rebuilt. So I believe we are good there. Now I want to use the Stillman strategy to help us understand who this was, because I know some of us maybe do not know who Antiochus Epiphanes is. I'm really thinking on which strategy to use, but because I'll do 2 presentations on this, so you can swipe to this one. Okay, so thank you very much. So what we'll do now is look through the study of Daniel, the prophecy of Daniel chapter 8, using the Stillman strategy. And basically it's more of a presentation that gives what is being taught kule nje. And then I'll do a quick analysis on who Antiochus, Epiphanes the fourth was and all that. Now the book of Daniel, it's a very interesting book, by the way. So Daniel chapter 1 verse 6, it's mainly the historical account. This is the preterist version of the book of Daniel, where you'll realize there are some similarities within the context. Then Daniel chapter 7 verse 12, mainly a future prediction of some historical account. Then they have some biblical record of dates that are mentioned there, all outlining through the time when Daniel reigned in Babylon. But you might notice there might be some discrepancies within that. Then within the visions of Daniel, these have been discussed with our elder. You saw the slides. There are also the materials, the handouts we've given you. You can do a quick reference on them. The book of Daniel chapter 2, we have the gold, we have the head of gold, we have the chest and arms of silver, we have the belly and thighs of bronze, we have the legs of iron, and then the feet of iron mixed with clay. A similarity of the same they do compare with Daniel chapter 7, whereby we have the first beast coming forth as of a lion, then the second beast as of a bear, the third beast as of a leopard, then the fourth beast that Daniel couldn't describe, that was very terrible. And these were basic fulfillments of the kingdoms of Babylon as the first, the second of the Medes and the Persians, the third as the Grecians or the Greeks, the fourth as of Rome. Then in Daniel chapter 8, we have the ram that aligns its existence with the second beast of Daniel chapter 7. That is the bear referencing Medo-Persia. Then we have the leopard referencing Greece. That is the male or the he-goat mentioned in Daniel chapter 7. Now the kingdoms, or rather Daniel's vision in chapter 8 is the vision of a ram and the he-goat. And then of the two timelines as they came forth, these have been discussed. You realize also there are some discrepancies within the timelines. As from 625, it should be 605/606 BC through to 539. Then came Medo-Persia that reigned from 539. That's from the context of Daniel chapter 5, from verse 28. Specifically verse 30, when King Belshazzar was destroyed by the Medes and the Persians on that fateful night, then came the reign of the Medo-Persians who ruled all through. Then the Grecians came through Alexander the Great in 331 AD all the way to 167, 168 BC. Here it's mentioned as 63 BC. I'll mention why imewekwa hapo hivyo as 63 BC. It's all about when Rome becomes, shifts from a republic to the moment it conquers the whole of the Grecian kingdoms, or rather the Greek nations, and all that happened in there. Now the outline, we have Daniel chapter 8, it's an introduction, verse 1 and verse 2. Then the dream while Daniel is stranded by the river Ulai, and then it proceeds as the dream is interpreted from verse 15 through to verse 25, then a conclusion of verse 26 through to verse 27. You'll bear with me, I'm trying to move fast because it's just a Stillman. This is a presentation from the other side, sawa sawa. And you realize there are similarities which gives proof to why prophecy still holds, and how these nations rose are a literal fulfillment of what God had planned or what God had ordained. So the same chapter, we've got the existence, rather the coming forth of these beasts. The ram comes forth in verse 3 and verse 4. The he-goat comes forth in verse 5 and verse 8. Then the little horn, we see him from verse 9 through to verse 14, whereby in verse 8 we are told Daniel has a dream, and within this dream it's 11 years before the fall of Babylon, while he is in Shushan Elam. And while there, Daniel sees a ram which represents Medo-Persia pushing in different directions. Then verse 5 and verse 8, we are told Daniel sees a male goat that represents Greece as the angel comes and gives an explanation to him. In Daniel chapter 8 verse 20, he is told the kingdom that would come would be the Medo-Persians, that represents the ram. Then in verse 21 of Daniel chapter 8, the ram, or rather the he-goat, is Greece coming from the west and destroys Medo-Persia. For we are told also within the same context that we are told within the same context that it has, just a moment, we are told within the same context that it had a great horn in the middle of its eyes representing Alexander the Great. Then 4 notable horns, that's Alexander's 4 generals, Ptolemy, Seleucus the First, Cassander, and Lysimachus, who arose after that. And this is just a pictorial representation. I believe we did bits of this last time we were here, as the 4 generals that arose. We have on this end the kingdom of the Ptolemy. We have another one that was up here, then Thrace, then we have the Seleucids that literally took a larger portion and went on ahead, conquering the whole of the northern section of these kingdoms. Now in Daniel chapter 8 verse 5 through to verse 8, Daniel sees a little horn that comes out from the 4 horns. That is in verse 9. And while he sees this, is from the 4th beast of Rome. Sorry. It's a relation that they do give in chapter 7 and chapter 8, because remember in chapter 7 we have a little horn, and in chapter 8 we also have a little horn. In chapter 7 verse 8, the little horn that comes forth there is from the 4th beast, Rome, that they claim is a Roman emperor who persecuted Christians in AD 65 and in AD 95. In AD 65, who was the Roman empire who lived in AD 65? He tortured Paul seriously. I believe Paul died in his hands. Who was that? Nero. Exactly, it was Nero. Then in AD 95, they say the horn of Daniel chapter 7 that arose in AD 95 is Domitian, another one who really terrorized and persecuted Christians. Then in Daniel chapter 8 verse 9, they say, mark my words, I'm saying this presentation is a presentation ya huko nje. Sawa sawa. Then in chapter 9, the little horn, they say, is from the great goat, that is Greece, Antiochus the 4th Epiphanes, who persecuted the Jews from 175 to 164 BC. And who is this Antiochus the 4th that they so claim came as the little horn? Antiochus came out of one of them, as is mentioned. But one thing you need to understand is that reading your Bible keenly is very, very much important. Why? Because verse 8 of Daniel chapter 8 speaks of the 4 horns that came forth from the 4 corners or the 4 winds of the earth. Then as it proceeds to verse 9, a very, very critical aspect of understanding how the structure of Daniel chapter 8 is, we are told, and out of one of them came forth a little horn in verse 9. You know, the one of them is ningumu kidogo. If you read your Bible keenly, you'll realize that it speaks of 4 horns that come forth. Let me just read it. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, and the great horn was broken, and it came up 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of heaven. Now, while they come forth towards the 4 winds of heaven, in verse 9 as a continuation, and out of one of them came forth a little horn. You know, in a way, it's not really clear where this little horn comes from. Did the little horn come from out of one of the 4 horns in Daniel 8:8, or the little horn came from out of one of the 4 winds of Daniel chapter 8 verse 8? That's something very critical for us to understand in this study. But here they say it comes forth from one of the 4 horns of Daniel chapter 8, and it dashes towards the south, and whereby Antiochus made war with Egypt. And while he made war with Egypt, a very critical aspect of this prophecy, because it will help us decipher it. It makes war with Egypt, then after kushindwa kidogo, he goes to Palestine to make war also with Palestine in Jerusalem. And here on the little horn, what is taught outside kule nje is teaching that he comes to the glorious land that is Palestine, giving a comparison to Daniel 11 verse 41. And then he removes the daily sacrifices, whereby he desecrates the temple and casts down God's truth, which is the old law. All of these are things which Antiochus Epiphanes did while he was in Jerusalem. And he magnifies himself with pride against the prince of the Lord. Then as the verses continue, he removes the daily sacrifices, desecrates the temple, and casts down God's truth, which is the old law. And he persecutes the Christians for 3 years. And by the way, I love this. Actually, this is something I downloaded online. For the record, I didn't prepare this. It's a presentation I downloaded online on what the preterists have in regard to Daniel chapter 8. Now, this is not my presentation, but their presentation. Very critical. And the persecution and desecration of Antiochus lasts 3 years. And it's very, actually we need to note all this down, because we look into historical records and then confirm, are all these teachings correct based on the Bible prophetic timelines zenye zilifanyika? And so they have two interpretations, just as I mentioned. They say it lasted about 3 years, that is 2300 evenings and morning sacrifices, or 1150 days, that would be 3.1 years from 168 BC to December 25th, 165, after the revolt of the Judas Maccabees, the Maccabean revolt that ended to the final dedication of the temple that came to be known as Hanukkah, present day Hanukkah, being celebrated in December by the Jews. And or in Bible context, it's called the Feast of Lights, a feast that Christ actually celebrated. It's recorded somewhere in John chapter, if it's not John chapter 6 verse 20, I believe it's John chapter 6 verse 20, the feast that was commemorated by Judas Maccabees on this very date until I've mentioned all that. It's John chapter 10 verse 22, sorry. John 10 verse 22. When all that happened. And Josephus also has particular mentions of this man, Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes, of all the terrible things that he caused to the land, or rather the people of Israel. The people of Israel. So basically this is the interpretation that they do have. I didn't want to, because to do a lot of presentation, we can shift to the other one on prophetic history, because it's also very, very much important for us to understand how these nations came forth. Because when we study our Bible, when you read and study your scriptures, you will realize that there's a way on how prophecy follows a very strict timeline. And this strict timeline that prophecy follows, it's a timeline whereby things happen just as they are ordained. Everything happens just as they are ordained. Everything happens in such a way that they happen in such a way that the fulfillment of these prophecies, like zilifanyika at the very right moment. Now, if you are keen enough, you realize that there are timelines that are accurate. So actually what I'll use as he's working on that, just be with me on the materials that you have. The one that has Daniel chapter 8. I think we never printed the one I need to use, but then we'll present it hapa mbele. We'll present it hapa mbele because it's sort of, you can shift to the slides on the prophetic history. Just next, get to slide the one on Daniel chapter 8, verse 1 to 8, verse 13 to verse 14. Yeah, that one. So when you look at this, you'll realize that these two interpretations are the same. Sorry, we never printed this, but we can just have a quick glance on it. The first kingdom that arises, because there are two beasts mentioned, or rather two animals mentioned in Daniel chapter 8. We have the ram that arose first, then the he-goat that arises next. When the ram arises, it takes power from Babylon at around 538, 539 BC. This was the Medo-Persian kingdom, whereby we are told it had two horns, the ram, and this ram, one horn was greater than the other. The one that was greater than the other was Persia, and Persia ndilikuja baadaye. Then it did according to its will. It conquered in the north, conquered in the west, and then conquered in the south. Then as it was waxing great in its majesty, what happened is that a he-goat arises, and this he-goat smites the ram and casts him to the ground. And then it had a notable horn in the middle of its eyes. And when the strong, that is that horning in the middle of its eyes, when it was strong, this great horn was broken. Now the great horn that got broken, it's the leader, as it's explained in Daniel chapter 8 from verse 15, whereby angel Gabriel gives an exposition to Daniel as to the rising forth of these beasts and animals, and the rule of Alexander the Great that abruptly ended at the height of his career in 323 AD. Then after this, because when he was dying on his deathbed, what he said is that when he was asked who would he leave his kingdom to, alikuwa na bibi yake, but the wife was still pregnant. Mtoto wake alizaliwa, but because of his last statement when he died, and this was a very respected leader of the armies of Greece, he said he was leaving his army to the strongest among his generals. He had 4 generals, and of these 4 generals, their names were Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. And these people had various places they used to reign. So after Alexander the Great died, what happened next, or what resulted next, was the Battle of the Diadochi. The Battle of the Diadochi was a battle whereby these 4 generals were now fighting amongst themselves to rule the kingdom that Alexander the Great had left behind. And as a result of this battle, there are several and lots of assassinations. Alexander the Great's wife was murdered. His kid was murdered because they wanted somebody else to take the throne. And because of this, the Seleucids went on and conquered Cassander and Lysimachus. And then after conquering Cassander and Lysimachus, there only remained 2 powers that existed within the 4 generals, and these are the ones that are now mentioned in Daniel chapter. They're the ones mentioned in Daniel chapter 11 of the 4 generals that remained hapo hivyo. Na peleka raka ili niingie kwa the main context nataka to present. It's just a quick one. So what happens is that these ones, Elder Bildad will give an exposition to the mighty king being Alexander. Kingdom is broken to his 4 generals fighting. Remember this yellow line, it's the Jewish nation that are battle and being taken to captivity over here. So over these nations there arose the king of the north, the Seleucids, after they conquered Cassander and Lysimachus. Seleucids were basically the Syrians. So the Syrian kings were the Seleucids. So several kings arose among them. I'll just mention their names teke. We had Seleucus the first, who took that leadership of the Seleucid Empire after Alexander the Great died. He was Seleucus the first, then there was Ptolemy the first Apochini, and as they kept on battling and fighting over each other, came Antiochus Theos, came Antiochus the second Theos, then Seleucus the second, Seleucus the third, then Antiochus the third, Magnus the Great. Then while all these were happening, we had Ptolemy the second. Now it's interesting to note that it's this Ptolemy the second, whereby we have a lot of history. This is Daniel chapter 11. I'm not handling the prophecy of Daniel 11, but it's important for us to understand how Antiochus comes into power. Now, Ptolemy the second, while all this is happening, it was during the intertestamental period. What is the intertestamental period? Other people would call it the divine interregnum. What was it like? When you shift from your Old Testament to the New Testament, there's always that blank page. It's a layman's term, or it's a household term, the blank page between the Old and the New Testament. A period of 400 years of silence. Now this period of 400 years of silence, the Bible was not just silent, but God had revealed through Daniel what would transpire in between the 400 years of silence. Now all this that happened in between the 400 years of silence zinafanyika from Daniel chapter 8, and a lot of it is described in Daniel chapter 11. So all these kings hapa hivi when wamerekodiwa in Daniel chapter 11 are kings who ruled and reigned during the 400 years of silence, and they're basically mentioned as to how they fought each other and all that. Now during this time the Jews walikuwa metolewa from captivity by the Persians and were told to go back to their home after the decrees to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now when all this had happened, what we see happening again is that the Jews were scattered all through the nations. And because of this dispersion that happened among the Jews, the Greeks took full authority, like the Greeks took full authority from the Persians. And Alexander the Great, his main aim was not just to conquer nations. He them in a way to assimilate them to their modern way of living. You know, it's more like America coming here today and wants us to work and do things as the Western nations. Basically, that is what the missionaries and our colonizers did. They came to Africa, they found the Africans were doing things their way, but they assimilated African to the Western culture and the Western way. That was all as Alexander the Great was fighting for before his generals took over. And that is what we come to see Antiochus the Fourth doing when he takes authority. Now, what was Alexander the Great doing? If you've ever read of history, there's something called Hellenization. Hellenization, to make all nations become Greek, to make all nations adopt the Greek culture. It's what happened to Egypt after the Greeks had conquered them. And when after Greeks walikuwa washawa conquer, that is Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great heads up and builds a city in Egypt. Who can guess the name of that city? Alexandria. Conquered Egypt, he goes and sets up a city named after his own name and builds a big library in Alexandria, whereby there was the university in Alexandria, and this library place watu walikuwa nasoma and all that. While this was happening, there were some Jews in Egypt who had lost path of their Jewish heritage in the manner of their speech. Now, as a result of this, having lost path to their Jewish heritage in the manner of speech, they could not understand Hebrew, neither could they understand the Hebrew canon that they had by then. It's called the Masoretic text, the original Hebrew canon. It's purely the Old Testament. Ptolemy II, this was Ptolemy Philadelphus, orders about 70 and 72 elders to come together and sort of translate the Hebrew canon of the Old Testament to the Greek version. And that became the first translation of the Hebrew canon, also known as the Septuagint. Septuagint, basically it's sept, like seven. There were 70 elders. Around 70 or 72. Now these people studied, translated the book of Genesis all through to the book of Malachi into the Greek version to help the Greeks that were dwelling in Alexandria under Ptolemy II, that was Ptolemy Philadelphus. Now when this happened, because it's also important why I'm mentioning this, because in my next presentation, I'll look into some of the texts that arose to give proof to the biblical timelines that we are studying, because these texts are not Adventist based. They are external texts that existed way before our own theology was developed. And this text originated during this divine interregnum, or what is called the intertestamental period, or in the layman's term, the 400 years of silence. Now when the translation of the Hebrew Bible was made to Greek, other texts also arose. Now these texts later came to be known by, just a quick question, who translated the Greek Bible to Latin? I believe this, I think I studied it in CRE in high school. Who translated the Greek Bible to Latin? Okay, what's the Latin Bible? Jina yake inaitwa aje? The Vulgate, right? The Vulgate. Now the translator, that's an assignment to us. When he translated that, there were texts that originated in the midst of this period that were being used iyo time yote. Now when he looked at this text, then did a comparison to the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text is basically the Hebrew Bible, the original Hebrew Bible that strictly has the 66 books of the Old Testament. He realized that there were some texts in hazikwa in the Hebrew Bible, but were purely in Greek, no Hebrew origins. Now realizing these were not in the original canon, he called them the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha in the sense that the hidden books. So while mentioning them as the Apocrypha, he set them aside and termed them as the Deuterocanonical books. Why am I mentioning this? We will read some of the Deuterocanonical books and maybe look into why we as Adventists, or as Protestants to be specific, we do not ascribe to some of their theologies, the theological aspects of the apocryphal books. So within this time arose the Apocrypha books, and among the Apocrypha books there's also the pseudepigrapha books. What are the pseudepigrapha books? Pseudepigrapha books are basically books that were written during this period, the 400 years of silence, and after that, that in a way shaped Christianity, but the writers of these books were not the original biblical writers. Let me give an illustration. We have in the Septuagint, basically because the Septuagint also contained about 70 plus books, including the apocryphal books, they had 4 books of Ezra. They had 4 books of Ezra. First Ezra, second Ezra, third Ezra, and fourth Ezra. Now of these books, what happened is that Kenya walitoa, I want to believe walitoa first Ezra, then second and third Ezra ilibaki. It was called Esdras. Wakabakisha mbili, and then separated the 2 Ezras to become the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah, which basically is one book. The book of Ezra and the book, which one comes first? Nehemiah or Ezra? Ezra. Now the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah then maintained those 2 within the original text of the Bible that we have as of canon. The reason why they maintained the 2 is because the same books ziko kwa the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible, but first Esdras and fourth Esdras haziko. Now what happens with these 2 books, so the first and fourth Esdras, that came to be known as the first and second Esdras in the apocryphal books or the deuterocanonical books? What happened is that fourth Esdras wasn't written by, or rather second Esdras haikuandikwa na Ezra, huyo Ezra wa Biblia, during the time of the exile while in Persia, while in Babylon, then wakitoka from the Medo-Persia, when the Medo-Persians allowed them to move, wakitoka huko. But it was written by someone who claimed himself to be Ezra. So such kind of books zinaitwa the pseudepigrapha. You know what a pseudonym is? A pseudonym like ni jina unatumia lakini si jina yako. So among the apocryphal books or the apocrypha books, kuna zile zenye ziliandikwa but wenye aliandika si the original person. So an example is second Ezra in your deuterocanonical, in your the apocrypha books. We'll read some of them. It's also interesting to note that the book second Ezra, it's a book that our pioneers used to use a lot, by the way. They used to use second Ezra a lot in the early days, in that wakitaka recognize themselves, they would quote verses and from second Ezra and then use those verses to identify themselves. Go study the history of that. I just wanted to mention because it's important ili mtu asishtuke sana when you start reading from the book first Maccabees. Sawa sawa, ili msishtuke sana. So that was telling me the second that arose during that time, and all these kingdoms arose. Then something happens when the king Antiochus III Magnus the Great arose. They wanted, because they kept on fighting each other and all that. Now as a result of fighting each other, when Seleucus IV arose into power, he took his son and gave his son to the Romans as sort of a pilgrimage. Unacheki like wale watu wa kitambo, maybe if you've watched some movies, sorry I have, you'll realize that they always gave their sons to a kingdom to be raised in the ways of the kingdom to show their allegiance. Kuna wengine wenye would pay tributes to the kingdom ili wasimalizwe and all that. And that is what this king Seleucus IV did to his son. He gave away Antiochus IV to Rome so that he would grow within the Roman courts. Now when Antiochus IV comes forth to rule, what happens is that he goes forth to destroy Egypt because he wanted to conquer Egypt. Then Egypt, realizing there was a power that was arising far greater than the Seleucids, pledged allegiance to the Romans and asked the Romans to protect them. Now when the Romans were asked to protect them, the Romans sent a one-man army to approach Antiochus. And history has it that when this man approached Antiochus within the deserts in Egypt, he literally drew a circle around Antiochus and told Antiochus IV Epiphanes to leave Egypt or be destroyed. Because Antiochus could do nothing facing such an humiliation, he goes forth now to the Jewish nations, whereby now he starts unleashing his wrath in Jerusalem among the Jews. Remember, the aim of these Greek empires, the Greek generals, were to cause Hellenization among everybody they conquered. Now what Antiochus IV Epiphanes does when he gets to Jerusalem, he converts the sanctuary, the tabernacle in Jerusalem, to become the temple of Zeus, to offer profane sacrifices that the Jews did not want to be offered while in Jerusalem. And as a result of this, the Israelites were fed up, something that even Alexander the Great himself did not do. Do you want to know why Alexander the Great did not dare trouble the Israelites or the Jews within their systems, or rather convert them? Antiochus, not Antiochus, Josephus writes within his historical records that there were few elders among the Jews who had understood the prophecies of Daniel. So when Alexander the Great came to them and wanted to convert them, to Hellenize them into the ways of the Greeks, what these elders did, they went and opened to Alexander the Great the prophecies that were prophesied of his coming. Those of Daniel chapter 8, that Greek would come and do all this. In short, these people had an understanding of the prophecies of Daniel. Josephus is a historian we refer to several times in regard to the historical records on history and how things played out on biblical narratives. And because of this, Alexander the Great left the Jews to practice their religion because they felt that this religion had prophesied of my rising. Now as a result of this, aliwaacha. But this man called Antiochus IV, when he comes forth, he tries to convert these people to the gods of the Jews. He transforms the temple in Jerusalem to become the temple of Zeus, to offer swines and pigs and all that. And this angered the Israelites. And while it angered the Jews, what happens next? A revolt was organized by Judas Maccabeus. Now Judas Maccabeus is the same person within the deuterocanonical context of the apocryphal books that wrote First Maccabees. Well, there are questions whether he was the one who wrote the book Second Maccabees, in a way that Second Maccabees would then become sort of a pseudepigrapher. Okay, what is Maccabees? Maccabees was not a family name, but it was a name. Allow me use this. Rao, before, when he was still living back in the early 90s, 2007, in his political arena, kuna time alikuwa inaitwa Nyundo, sindio? So kuna time alikuwa inaitwa Nyundo, like msata come to like ajipachike tu jina. Actually Maccabees, it's Nyundo in Hebrew. Hallelujah. So like ilikuwa Nyundo yenye napiga the Seleucids ama the Greeks, because these guys are terrorizing them, and the only people who could come and destroy them was a hammer who would hit them hard and push them away. So the family of kina Judas, starting from his dad mwenye alianza kumenshoniwa as Maccabees, ndiye alitajwa kama Maccabees. So when Judas Maccabees comes, his son, he takes forth what his father had decided, organize a revolution, revolts against Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, and pushes them away and rededicates the temple from what, actually cleanses the temple from what Antiochus IV had done. But one thing interesting is that Bible prophecy will always remain Bible prophecy. Because the timeline that Jamaa ali spend in Israel, in Jerusalem, does not fit into Bible prophecy. Please transit to the other slides. Now, let us now do a keen study as to how these nations, or rather how it's a perfect counterfeit that is being used in proof, or rather in reference to the existence of, in reference to the rising forth of that's the master counterfeit. That's the master counterfeit. So we've tackled this and basically a story. At least now we know who Antiochus IV is and the things he did. You can go read more about him. Ukiwa nyumbani, just some history classes and all that. So what is at stake? That should be the question that we're asking right now. What is at stake? Now that which is at stake is that we must first acknowledge why this is very persuasive, because understanding the prophecy in line with Antiochus IV fulfilling the emergence of the little horn, it is very persuasive, and it's presented in these four formats, and we'll look into this. The first point is that he is a Seleucid king. He is a Seleucid king. He was a Seleucid king of the Greek empire fragment that arose after Alexander the Great had died. And by this he arose from 175 to 164 BC, one of the divisions of the Grecian Empire, whereby the little horn comes from one of the four, as mentioned in Daniel chapter 8 verse 9. Point number 2, that we need to understand that he rose through intrigue, not inheritance. This little horn rises through intrigue, not inheritance. You'll compare this with Daniel chapter 8 verse 23 that has it that, and in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors came to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding, dark sentences shall stand up. And on this context, the king that arises is a king of bold countenance. One who understands riddles is the one that rises. Antiochus, it's critical to understand, was not the rightful heir. He seized power through cunning. Actually, his father was Antiochus III. Within the previous slide, sorry I didn't mention this, but there were battles within the Seleucid Empire. His brother ruled for a short time, then he came forth to take power from his brother Antiochus IV, and like alidanganya his brother. It was something that was very much common back in the days, to con your brother or to con somebody who was on the seat and then take the seat for yourself. So it ended to the assassination of Seleucus IV. Then he manipulated the Roman favor and then eliminated rivals. Just as mentioned, he was sort of raised among the Romans. Then the Hebrew word for intrigue within that context is halakaklakot. I know while doing this study, and maybe also advisors, you can always use qbible.com. qbible.com. It's a beautiful website that sort of helps you understand the various lexicons venye zimetumika. Think of it as a concordance, but now you can access the Masoretic text, you can access the Greek Septuagint, the LXX, and also you can access the translation of the same verses in English in the King James Version as the translations in Zinasonga. And I sort of relied a lot on that. Now the third point we need also to understand is that he persecuted the Jews, and within his persecution of the Jews, as mentioned in Daniel 8 verse 22, he shall destroy mighty men and the people of the saints. And Antiochus is the archetype of Jewish persecution during the intertestamental period, because he outlawed the Torah observance, he outlawed Sabbath keeping, he outlawed circumcision. He also desecrated the temple in Jerusalem by sacrificing pigs upon the altars therein, which sort of relates to the abomination of desolation. And actually, from the apocryphal text, we'll just write this down. Maybe if somebody has the Apocrypha Bible, anaweza kuwa anatusomea kutukonfirmia. Judas Maccabees, while writing First Maccabees, confirms of how he desecrated the temple in First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 54. And also he slaughtered the Jews, those who resisted Hellenization. The fourth point also worth understanding is that the aspect of how he desecrated the temple, the regular burnt offering was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. Antiochus stopped the daily sacrifices, the mentioning of the Tamid in Daniel chapter 8, then in December 167 BC, converting the temple into the shrine of Zeus Olympias, and the temple was ritually defiled for approximately 3 years until the Maccabean cleansing of the shrine that happened in December 164 BC, also known as Hanukkah, that commemorates this, also the Feast of Lights, which seems to match Daniel 8's description perfectly, which seems to match Daniel chapter 8, its description perfectly. It's also it's basically the things that I've mentioned over here. Now, quite a comparison of what Antiochus did, because Rome is the little horn. Antiochus comes forth fulfilling the 2300 days within the past, ending his reign in 164 BC, while Rome comes forth and fulfills all this prophetic timeline for a period of 2300 years as the little horn and all its existence within the prophetic timelines in Ezekiel. Then in Daniel 8:14, we find that this is already fulfilled, but when we pick it as the little horn, Daniel chapter 8 verse 14, the little horn to be Rome, Daniel 8 verse 14 gets to be fulfilled in 1844. Then no sanctuary, based on the Antiochus analogy, no sanctuary is cleansed today, but on Rome as the little horn, the sanctuary is cleansed now. No investigative judgment on this end, but here we've got the investigative judgment. Now, the case for Antiochus, I think I've mentioned all these in my previous explanation. And what you need to understand, that all these are real historical facts. The preterist's case is not invented. It's simply insufficient, and we now examine 6 reasons why the reasons nimetoka tu kumention now do not allow this to be sufficient. Now, what is important here is that of the 6 reasons I want us to look into now is that Daniel 8 uses a deliberate progression of the Hebrew word gadal to become great with escalating intensity. And that is the first thing I need us to understand. He uses gadal to be great. And one thing you need to understand, just be with me in the book of Daniel chapter 8. Be with me in the book of Daniel chapter 8. I want us to look into the kingdoms that arise here. The he-goat. And this is verse 4. Verse 4 says, "And I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beasts might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great." I want us to understand that. The ram, when it's arising, this is Medo-Persia, did according to his will in verse 4 and became great. Now, the great mentioned within that context, it's gadal, to be great. And I want us to understand how deliberate the grammatical progression is. Let's get to the second beast, or the second animal we see. That is the he-goat. And we read in verse 6, verse 7, verse 8. Verse 8. "Therefore the he-goat waxed very great." I want us to understand that. The ram did according to his will and was great. When the he-goat comes in verse 8, the Bible records he waxed very what? Very great. Meaning when the he-goat comes, his conquering would be way greater than the conquering that the Medo-Persian or the ram did. So there's that grammatical progression that happens there. Great, very great, and then finally the little horn. How is it that the little horn comes forth? Verse 9. The little horn. Verse 9 of Daniel chapter 8. And out of one of them came forth a little horn which waxed what? Exceedingly great. Najua nyi pia mnajua kizungu, si ndio? If you want to compare something that is great, something that is very great, and something that is exceedingly great, do you think something that is exceedingly great can overpower something that is very great? I just want us to make sense of this. It cannot. If it's exceedingly great, then it means that this little horn must have been a kingdom way greater than Greek itself. Not just a subsect of Greek, like a general of the Grecian Empire. Because it did exceedingly what? Exceedingly great. Very, very much important. A very critical point for us to understand. But then that is just English. That is just English. Now from the concordance, I want us to confirm what the concordance has for us. In the context of Daniel chapter 8 verse 4, the context of Daniel chapter 8 verse 8, and the context of Daniel chapter 8 verse 9. The Persian kingdom, when it's arising, what is happening is that the word great, whereby he made himself great there, it's Higafil or Higadil. Now Higafil, Hifil or Higadil, it's more of a comparative sentence. While in verse 8, it's the aspect of the goat coming to be very great, it's Gadal Meod. Gadal Meod, becoming very great, meaning it's more of a greater comparative as the animal or the nation that came before. Now coming to Daniel 8 verse 9, the Hebrew word there, it's Wawilgdal Adseba Hasa Mayin. Now that context, it grew great, even greater, it grew exceedingly great. It's more of a superlative cosmic scope. It's more of somebody trying to say you are good, you are better, you are best. Are you getting it? So when the ram comes forth, the ram was good. When the he-goat comes forth, the he-goat was better. But when the little horn comes forth, the little horn was the best. So he was great, very great and exceedingly great. Something very important for us to understand within this context over here. The verdict is that the text demands the little horn surpasses both Persia and Greece in greatness, in that Antiochus ruled one fragment of Greece, was expelled from Egypt by Rome in 168 BC. You can go Google this as the day of Eleusis. EU, it's always spelled as U. Eleusis. And died mid-campaign, as is recorded, whereby he ruled only one portion of the Grecian Empire with but little success. Meaning the Antiochus analogy of him being the little horn cannot hold. Are we together? We are together. The next point, because it's a main reason why Antiochus failed. I just don't want to repeat much of it. Problem number 2 we see here is the 3-directional conquest of this little horn. That is from Daniel chapter 8 verse 9. Now, Daniel 8 verse 9 says, out of one of them came forth a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards where? Towards where? The glorious land. Now Antiochus, or rather the little horn, as per the context, must first conquer in 3 directions: the south, the east, and the glorious land. And what is the glorious land? Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the glorious land. And on this context, Antiochus the fourth's actual military record, we find that he first of all invaded Egypt in BC 70 to 168 and was later expelled by Rome after a year, in that he failed Rome. The result of this, that alianguka, like there's a way how He failed. After that, he marched on to Alexandria, turned back the Roman legate. Actually, this is the name of the man that Rome sent to him. I believe it was Cassius. If not Cassius, you can go check, but it's Popilius Linus. Without a battle, and akamfukuza out of that. As a result, the transitory here was incomplete. That is his quest to the south. On his quest to the east, Antiochus IV, his father, already subjugated the east in the campaigns that happened between 210 to 206 BC. A lot of them might be mentioned in Daniel chapter 11, with which I did like a quick analysis of those. And Antiochus IV, when he comes, attempted recovery in his final 2 years, but died before completing the campaign, as Maccabees records in 1 Maccabees chapter 6, verse 1 through to verse 16. Please write this down, you'll record them down. I'm saying some people might be surprised. We are mentioning Maccabees because they are important to this study. Now, here I gave a reference as to when they existed and why they are historically recorded. Though kuna zingine haziko historically correct, by the way. Maybe some other study, some other day. So he died before finally conquering. As a result, we have inherited gains, died mid-campaign. Then his march towards the glorious land, we have that Antiochus IV took Judea from the Ptolemies in 198 BC at the Battle of Panias before Antiochus IV. This was the father to Antiochus IV. Then when Antiochus IV inherited Judea, when he came to the throne, you cannot grow towards a territory you already own. Because that was a territory they already owned. When he came, he also gave a lot of power to that territory. So as a result, this was inherited. He did not conquer that very territory. He did not conquer that very territory. Sawa sawa. Which basically tells us that none of the 3 conquests that Antiochus IV alijaribu conquer based on the context qualify. He was expelled from the south, died attempting the east or Parthia, and then he already ruled the glorious land before his reign began. Now the third problem I need us to look into is the problem of the Macon lexical study. And this is in the context of Daniel chapter 8. This might be a lot of it's not a lot of context, because when dismantling a heresy, you have to get to the context and also understand keenly why it does not hold. So, I'm calling us to be Bible students, and Bible students does not just mean doing Bible study. It means getting back to the Hebrew context, getting back to the Greek translation, the Hebrew context or the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew wanatumia sahi leo, the Jews wanatumia leo, it's called the Masoretic. It has not been tainted. Still original wanatumia, it was used way before the Greek version of the Septuagint came forth. So we need to understand that. Now the third problem I want us to look into is the context of Daniel chapter 8 verse 11. How he did not cast down the Macon. He never cast down the Macon or the holy place or the place of his sanctuary, because in that verse we are told, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. The word place happened within the context of Daniel 8 verse 11. It's called Makom in Hebrew. Now a lexical examination of all the 17 occurrences of this specific term within the Old Testament is that an examination of every occurrence of Makom, or the place within that context when used with the sanctuary or dwelling terminology, result in 16 out of 17 cases. And Makom within that particular context refers to God's dwelling place, either the earthly temple or the heavenly temple, and only one occurrence is ambiguous. Now key verses to note is the book of Deuteronomy chapter 12 verse 5, whereby the place which the Lord your God will choose within that context. Then 1 Kings chapter 8 verse 30, when the temple is being dedicated, here in heaven your dwelling place, that is Solomon, while dedicating the temple. Then we find the same in Ezra chapter 2 verse 68, the house of God, to set it up on its Makom, to set it up on its place. Now the implication of this is that if Makom in Daniel chapter 8 verse 11 follows the Old Testament usage as we've quoted from Deuteronomy, 1 Kings, and Ezra. It refers to the dwelling place of God, not merely a building. Now, the little horn, it's very much critical to understand, attacks God's dwelling, which means either the earthly temple destroyed by Rome later in AD 70, as we well know because we are prophecy students, or the heavenly sanctuary as attacked by the Papal counterfeit system. Very critical. And this is why Antiochus fails. Because Antiochus defiled the temple but does not meet the criteria of Daniel chapter 8 verse 11, whereby the last context of that verse says, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. The place, Makon. I need us to understand that. So what this means is that the building, the fact that he defiled the temple Antiochus, the building remained intact. He desecrated it, but 3 years later, the Maccabees cleansed and rededicated it during Hanukkah, also known as the Feast of Lights. Very critical and very important. Now, the Makon was never overthrown. Never was it overthrown. And here the aspect of being overthrown or being cast down or demolished is huslak. That's the Hebrew context. Huslak. It wasn't destroyed. All that happened was that iliangushwa tu. And with this lexical evidence points decisively away from Antiochus towards a power that actually destroyed God's sanctuary. And which power was that? Which power was that destroyed God's sanctuary? The physical structure and then the heavenly structure, Rome. I hope we are together. I believe you guys can write down the verses and just go do a comparison of the same later, because I've explained, but then all the contexts zilikuwa hapo. So the fourth problem that we find with Antiochus as a counterfeit representative of the little horn comes to the time period mismatch. Get out your pens. Who has the Deuterocanonical of the Apocrypha within him? Now, I want us to do calculations, because if you don't do calculations, you won't understand. So, utakuwa natusomea this the Apocrypha. We are not profaning, but Judas Maccabeus was somebody, and he wrote the book First Maccabees, and it's good to give to record. Sawa. Yes. Now, the numbers in Daniel chapter 8. Now, Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 speaks of 2,300 evenings and mornings until the sanctuary is cleansed. Daniel 8 verse 26, the vision concerns many days, not immediate fulfillment. Very critical for us to understand. Now, the question we should be asking ourselves is this: what was the actual desecration period of the temple? And what was Antiochus' actual desecration period? First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 54. First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 54.
Check. First Maccabees 1:54. Now the 15th day of the month Kislev.
The 15th day of the month Kislev.
In the 145th year.
In the 145th year of the Seleucid era.
They set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar.
The temple was destroyed, or rather the pagan altar was set up. This is Judas Maccabees giving a record. Actually, something interesting about Judas Maccabees, you guys can go start reading Judas Maccabees from chapter 1 verse 1. Say now, just go read for fun. Sasa, you'll realize that he aligns his story with the book of Daniel chapter 11 as to how these kingdoms rose, the other kingdoms fought and battled in verse 9, verse 10. Like it's purely prophecy, but then he explains how these kings rose. Please go read that book, the book of Maccabees. Proceed. Chapter 54.
It continues. And builded idol altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side.
On every side. Meisha. Okay, thank you very much. Basically, chapter 1 of the book of Maccabees, first Maccabees chapter 1, describes the history of how these kingdoms arose. Tu venye nini inaileta. With the Daniel 11 inaileta how these kingdoms arose. Then Maccabees anashughulika na the one who terrorized them, the one whom he hit as the hammer, that is Antiochus. Then he says, he gives the timeline that this temple was desecrated on the 15th day of the month of Kislev on the 145th year of the Seleucid era. Actually, these people never used a sort of hawakuwa wanatumia our calendar venye tunatumia sahi. When they mention the Seleucid era, they mean when the Seleucids began ruling. From the time when Alexander the Great died, then the first Seleucus the first, that is what they mentioned, but the 145th year of the Seleucid era. So that is how they used to mention their kingdom, their nation. Then later when Julius Caesar comes in, they introduce more months. Months is in our favor. Then when Octavian comes in, Octavian introduces an additional month because Julius Caesar alikuwa na yake ya July. Then yeye pia akaongeza ingine. Ilikuwa na ngapi? Ilikuwa August. Well, Octavian came to be known as Augustus, Emperor Augustus. So that is history, guys. So that is when the temple altar, the pagan altar was set up. Then when was the temple rededicated? Read from 1 Maccabees chapter 4, verse 52 and verse 54.
1 Maccabees 4:52. Now on the 25th day of the 9th month, which was called the month Kislev, in the 148th year, they rose up betimes in the morning and offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings which they had made. Look at what time and what day they eaten and profaned it, even in that was it dedicated with songs and cithons and harps and cymbals.
Thank you very much. I did not understand something. The book of Daniel, chapter 8, verse 11, verse 12, verse 13, and verse 14. When the question comes in verse 14, the question is, how long would the pagan altar remain set up? How long would these people continue destroying the temple of God? And the answer that comes forth in verse 14 of Daniel chapter 8, it's 2,300 days. Now, when Maccabees mentions of these timelines, actually there's the discrepancy between the 2,300 days. How does the discrepancy come in? Just as I've mentioned, the eras that their years zilikuwa zinaanza na from the time when they started ruling to the time when they reigned like your period yote. So when we mentioned the 145th year of the Seleucid era to the 148th year of the Seleucid era, 145th year of the Seleucid era was basically 167 BC. 167 BC. And on the 148th era of the Seleucid era happened in 164 BC on the 25th of December. So December 164, going backward to December 167 BC, that duration would be exactly 3 years and 10 days. How long is 3 years and 10 days? How long is 3 years and 10 days? 3 years is equals to how many? 3 by 360? Because months by then zilikuwa zinachukua 30 days. 3 by 360? Or you can just take your time and uhesabu he to this, because it's a period of 148 minus 145. Then just, how many? 10? 10? 1090 in totality. That is 3 years. 3 years plus 10 days. That is 3 years plus 10 days. It's 1090 in totality. Okay, now that 1090, does it match 2,300 literal days? Leave that alone. Let's pick it from the point where by now wanasema like it's evenings and mornings. So 1150 evenings and 1150 mornings, being totaling to 11, halving the evening mornings. Does that 1090 umepata total to 1150? So basically that's a discrepancy, because 2,300 means 6 years, 4 months. This guy spent 3 years, 10 days over here. No nearly 3 years, not long. He never spent any long time. When you pick on the other aspect here, 1050, which would be a duration of 3 years, 2 months, the guy spent like 3 years, 10 days. 3 years, 10 days. Neither 2300 nor the 1150 fit into what Antiochus IV did. And what this basically tells us is that the time period within this context is wrong. The time period within this context is wrong. The time period within this context is wrong. It's nothing to do about a rounding error. Neither is it a fundamental mismatch. It's purely wrong. Let's get to slide 10. That would be the fifth problem that we have here. The later end of their rule. Antiochus did not rise at the latter end of their rule. This is the context of Daniel 8. Verse 23, and in the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall rise up. What does this verse say? That at the latter end of their rule, when the transgressors have reached their full measure, a king of bold countenance shall rise. Their rule here basically refers to the 4 Greek kingdoms, the 4 horns of the great goat. And who are these 4 horns of the great goat? Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and who? And Seleucus. Now what this says is that at the latter end of their rule, the little horn arises after the later end of the rule, like the final phase of the Greek period. But when was Antiochus IV? Antiochus reigned from 175 to 164. He was the 8th ruler of the Seleucid dynasty. And after him, the Seleucid Empire continued for another 100 years before they were fully destroyed. More than 100 years, 100 plus years, ending definitively only when Pompey, who we know of Pompey, right? Pompey alipigana na nani, who we know if you are a good student of history. Julius Caesar, sindio? Then he ended up defeating Julius Caesar. By now we have the story of who is this Egyptian princess and his brother Kina Mark Antony. What's her name? Cleopatra. I remember that all these people are referenced in the book of Daniel chapter 11. Guys, you should study the book of Daniel. It's an interesting revelation and fulfillment of the prophecies as they happened in actual and real record in today's time. And that is why in the first study, the Stillman strategy to Lutumia, we saw the 63 BC. That is when the Greeks, actually it's also interesting to note, you guys remember the first study we did? Similarly, like Walsema, Greeks reigned from reigned from 331. Actually, they had it at 332 to 63 BC. Then they claim Antiochus is the one who did what? Antiochus is the one who sort of they claim Antiochus is the they claim Antiochus is the one who sort of is the little horn. But then 823 gives us something different. Like lazima the 4 horns like iishe ndio wangerule. So Antiochus was nowhere near the end of the Grecian Empire. Because just a quick history, the first emperor that came was Seleucus the first. That was Nicata, the founder of the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus comes forth as the 8th king. Later, we have 100 years or by 20 plus kings arose within the Seleucid Empire. Then the Roman annexation by Pompey in 63 BC that ended the Greek rule. This basically confirms that Antiochus reigned near the middle of the Seleucid period, not the end. And the latter end in Daniel 8 verse 23 clearly points to a power rising after the Greek kingdom's decline, which was Rome. So Antiochus cannot be at the latter of the end of the Greek rule when the dynasty continued for a century after his death. Now just to go fast, I believe time is way much spent, guys. Time is way much spent. My apologies. The context of Daniel chapter 8 verse 17 and verse 19 whereby the argument here is both verses 17 and verse 19 state explicitly that the vision concerns the time of the end. We'll read Daniel 8 verse 17 and verse 18. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, understand, O son of man, for at the end of time shall be the vision. Verse 19, and when he said, behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at that time appointed, the end shall be. A very critical aspect. Understand, O man, that the vision is for the end of the time. A repetition of the same in verse 19. And the question here is that when is the time of the end? When is the time of the end? Daniel chapter 9, the 70 weeks prophecy, provides a chronological anchor to this, in that the 70 weeks are cut off from Daniel chapter 8, chapter 9, verse 23, verse 24, and the aspect, the cut off, the Hebrew word for cut off in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, when the 70 weeks are cut off, it's nehakta. Nehakta, that's the Hebrew context of being cut off in Daniel chapter 9 verse 22, verse 24. And from the 2300 days, they share the same starting point, in that the 70 weeks definitively end in AD 34. The stoning of Stephen, whereby now the gospel goes to the Gentile. And if the time of the end includes or extends past the 70 weeks, then it cannot end when Antiochus' rule ended. That is in 164 BC with Antiochus. The logical proof to this, let us just reason this out, brothers and sisters. Gabriel states twice that in Daniel chapter 8, matters concerning the time of the end. Verse 17 and verse 19. The 70 weeks in Daniel chapter 9 are cut off from the 2300 days of Daniel chapter 8. That is in Daniel 8 verse 14. The 70 weeks end in AD 34, confirmed in the New Testament chronology. And as we proceed, therefore, that the time of the end extends at minimum to AD 34, at minimum. That should be noted. Antiochus dies in 164 BC, 198 years before the time of the end even begins. The conclusion is this: Antiochus cannot be the little horn. He cannot be the little horn. Antiochus cannot be the little horn. And these are the aspects that we have studied: the comparative greatness, the three-directional conquest, the Macon must be cast down, the time period cannot fit, the latter end of their rule, and then the time of the end, which is decisive. You'll realize that this actually makes it, finalizes the whole matter as to the aspects here. I don't want to repeat it because we've already done all of it. We've already done everything. So the true fulfillment of Rome over here as the pagan the little horn comes forth in two phases. The horizontal conquest, we find Rome in Daniel chapter 8 verse 9. Just go read history. History will confirm all of this. The Punic Wars, that's when Rome went to conquer North Africa and absorbed it in 146 BC. Then Egypt becomes a Roman province in 30 BC. Cleopatra, when they were placed as guardians over them. Then Ptolemaic dynasty ends under Rome, and Rome was exceedingly great towards the south. Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes was not. When he went forth to the east, this was the Mithridatic Wars from 88 to 163 BC. Rome's expansion through Asia Minor, the Seleucid Syria absorbed by Pompey in 163 BC, and Rome genuinely was great towards the east. Then as it proceeds, we realize that it then goes forth to the glorious land whereby Pompey conquers Jerusalem in 163 BC. Then Judea becomes a Roman protectorate, and Herod the Great appointed by Rome in 37 BC, whereby now Rome acquired now the glorious land. And that is why when Herod is appointed, he was not a Hebrew. And it's just a lot of good stuff when you realize that he was not an original Jew, was more of an outcast, and he was placed ruler among the Jews. Then when he comes forth and anataka kuua Yesu, because he knows that this is more of a legit ruler who can take over. It's good history for us to study, because it all comes down to everything that happened to the intertestamental period and how it affected the rise of Christianity and also the New Testament record. So the second aspect that is worth noting of the true fulfillment of Rome on its second phase was the sanctuary and the hosts and the Tamid. That's from actually verse 9 of Daniel 8 speaks of the first phase of its political conquest. Then from verse then on its second phase, from verse 11 through verse 12, now speaks of its vertical or the spiritual conquering of these nations of Rome through the medieval period, and when it casts down everything, when the Dale is cast down. I believe this will be discussed, but because of time, allow me just mention them teke, whereby everything happens and gives a confirmation to Rome being the kingdom that finally conquered the nations of the nation, or finally conquered, or rather fits into the position of the little horn of the little horn. I think I'll just have to do this. There's no way of just assuming it, because it's also important to understand it. Now in Daniel chapter 8 verse 10 through to verse 12, it describes the three parallel actions of the little horn. And these three parallel actions of the little horn: number one, it attacked the hosts of heaven; number two, the removal of the Tamid, or the continual offering; and then number three, the casting down of the sanctuary. And these three are not separate events, but three aspects of one system. And how does this happen? By imposing the earthly priesthood, a sacrificial mass, and a human mediator, that is the Pope and all that, the priests, the forgiveness of sins and all that between the believers and Christ. The papal system functionally removes the awareness of Christ's true continual priestly work in the heavenly sanctuary, and it is not that Tamid literally stops. Christ continues his works, but the system obscures it. It substitutes with an earthly counterfeit. And one thing that is important for us to understand is that this is not a political attack, it's a soteriological attack. What's a soteriological attack? Okay, what's theology? Let me start now. What's theology? Okay, what's biology? Biology. What's biology? We studied all this. What's biology? What's biology? The study of life. Take it to the study of life. So, in the study of life. Okay, what's theology? What's theology? The study of God. The theos, the study of God. What's Christology? Okay, now what's soteriology? What's soteriology? The study of? You guys can Google it, Bwana. It's the study of the gospel, I believe, soteriology. It's more of a soteriological attack whereby an earthly priestly system is substituted for Christ's heavenly high priestly ministry, recorded in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 1 through to verse 2. And the eyes of humanity are redirected away from the true mediator in the true heavenly sanctuary. Now, what is the Tamid? What is this Tamid that is mentioned within this context? The Tamid is not the daily sacrifice alone. It refers to Christ's entire continual heavenly ministration as a high priest. And the true Christ's heavenly ministry is Christ as our interceding high priest, as is in Hebrews chapter 7 through to Hebrews chapter 9. His sacrifice once and for all, which is still effective. The continual intercession before the Father, and his blood that speaks on behalf of the saints. While the counterfeit on the other end that was enacted by Rome or papacy in its original context as the little horn, it's the earthly priesthood claiming to mediate on our behalf. The petition of Christ's sacrifices for the masses and all that. Then the intercession through earthly saints such as Mary, pray for us. So and so do what? Pray for us. We know all that. The intercessory prayers that are being offered through earthly saints that are canonized. That there's that act to make people become saints. And on the last aspect is the auricular confession to human priests and all that. Now the counterfeit system is designed to make humanity look to earth instead of heaven, away from the real mediator to the right, we who is at the right hand of the Father. I know we've sort of also mentioned, I believe this should be the last aspect. I saw somebody wanted to take a photo. Let me just get it back so that you can take the photo. But the materials will be shared with us. The materials will be shared with us. Okay, so tukikaribia kumaliza, because it's been more of a heavy study. It's the Daniel chapter 11 verse 22 chronological anchor, and this we'll do in the next slides. And on this context, there are three Hebrew words link Daniel chapter 9 verse 26 and Daniel 11 verse 22, establishing a chronological anchor. And this demonstrates that Daniel 11:22 contains three rare Hebrew words that appear together only in Daniel chapter 9 verse 26. And this linguistic link places the little horn's activity after the Messiah's crucifixion, definitively ruling out Antiochus, who died 130 plus years before Christ. What are these three Hebrew words? Daniel chapter 9 verse 26. And after 62 weeks shall the Messiah be cut off, but not for himself and the people of the prince that shall come. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined. 11 verse 22 speaks of, and with the arms of the flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yeah, also the prince of the covenant. There are three Hebrew words worth understanding here. The first one is nagid. The second one is setep. The third one is berith. Now Daniel chapter 9 verse 26 context, the Messiah, the prince, nagid, shall be cut off. In 11:22, the context of nagid, we see even the prince nagid, and the significance between these two verses both refer to a covenantal leader referring to the Messiah. The nagid within the context, the prince, the Messiah, Christ in his earthly incarnate state occurs only 3 times within this context: 9:25, 9:26, and 11:22. The second context, or the second Hebrew word here, is setep. Now setep is seen, and the people of the prince shall destroy, and the verse proceeds with a flood. In verse 11:22, we read, and they shall be swept away with a flood before him. It's more of a military, overwhelming destruction because waters are involved. The aspect of setep within these two, flood occurs in Daniel only in these two verses, confirms they describe the same event. It's more of a military conquest. The next and the last one, it's berith. Berith, we see it in the text that he shall make a strong covenant, berith, with many. Then 11:22, the prince of the covenant, berith. The same Hebrew word used. The covenant language here is on a messianic context, which is very, very critical and important. And with this we understand that Daniel 9 26 places these three words in the context of the Messiah's death and the subsequent Roman destruction of Jerusalem. So if Daniel 11:22 uses the same three words, it must refer to the same chronological period, i.e., very important, that the 1st century AD or later. But Antiochus IV, we find that he died 130 years literally before Christ died, before this was fulfilled. Meaning Antiochus to mean him as the little horn, it's theologically impossible. It's chronologically impossible, because the linguistic link between these two verses is the most precise chronological anchor in the entire book. The little horn operates and must operate after the crucifixion. Why does this matter? Why does this identification matter? It's not merely for an academic basis to, on should I say an apologetic basis. The three-word link places the little horn in the Christian era, which means, number one, it's important to note that the little horn is active during the church age. Number two, it attacks Christ himself, the Prince of the Covenant. Number three, its activities extend to the end of time, which includes 1844 and the present day. That is the little horn. That is the little horn that we see within this context over here. And what this basically means is that if Rome is a little horn, the 2300 prophetic years that run from 457 to 1844, sanctuary cleansed, the investigative judgment is now. The heavenly sanctuary is real. Hebrews 8, 1 and 2 confirms that. And Daniel 8 describe it being attacked. Daniel 8:14 describe it being cleansed. The investigative judgment is in progress, beginning of the conclusion of the 2300 days in 1844, whereby God is adjudicating cases of the professed people, and Christ is as our high priest right now, where he entered the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary at his ascension, as recorded in Hebrews 9:11-12. His intercession is ongoing, and our identity as a church is grounded here. Why? Because this church exists because Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 is not past. We are a movement in prophecy, not tradition. Amen. We are a movement in prophecy and not tradition. As the closing thoughts, it's important for us to note, as we'll proceed now after a short break, is that if the 2300 years end in 1844, and if Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 says, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed, and the Hebrew word within that is nitzdak, when put in its right state, vindicated, then 1844 marks the beginning of the final phase of Christ's high priestly ministry, the antitypical day of atonement, the investigative judgment depicted in Daniel chapter 8. As a summary, is that Antiochus IV fails in all proofs that we've laid forth, and Rome in its pagan and Rome purple faces fulfills every specification as recorded in Daniel chapter 8 from verse 11 through to verse 14. For unto 2300 evenings and mornings then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Any questions? Any questions? I know it's been a long study with a lot of content on several historical records, but that is prophecy, guys. It's interesting. It's prophecy. Any questions? Materials will be shared. Let me ask some quick fire questions and see if we roll at par with what we've taught today. So, number one, why do most scholars accept the Antiochus interpretation? Ama tumechoka tuwape break tukuje tulize hizi maswali after break. Tunaweza simama, we stretch a bit. We can stand and stretch a bit. I know we are tired, but we can stand and stretch a bit. Just stand and stretch a bit. Yeah, stretch a bit, stretch a bit. Stretch a bit, yeah, stretch a bit. Elder Gitea would say we can also try jogging. It's good to exercise, by the way. We can try jogging, just stretch a bit. I know tumekaa chini sana, and now we need to at least awaken our thoughts, and the room might also be a bit hot. We can have our seats. These are the questions we'll start with, and maybe just brainstorm on them. Why do most scholars accept the Antiochus interpretation? Didn't Jesus himself say the abomination of desolation was fulfilled by the Romans in AD 70? Some very important questions. And if the papal system is the little horn, why are our Catholic brothers and sisters in Christ? Like, why are they in Christ, our brothers and sisters in Christ? That is the question we should ask ourselves. And doesn't this interpretation make us sound like sort of anti-Catholic conspiracies? There's that aspect, but then we'll study them as we come forth. So I believe we can do some hymns. I'll offer a prayer. We do some hymns, take a break, then see if lunch is already. Come lunch is already. We do the last session. Then Elder Bildad will come. Then Elder Bila will come. We'll pray. Thank you, Lord, for keeping us and holding us and guiding us through this study. These are some important points, important knowledge that are critical for us to understand. Lord, for a defense of this which we believe in. Keep us, Lord. Open our minds to understand and comprehend your prophecies and your Bible, those that are recorded in the book of Daniel. For all these are those that will keep us safe at the end of time, Father. Keep us, we ask in